because we're going to be covering larger areas of water and making larger brush strokes. So the water control might get a little bit trickier with this, but that's also kind of the point. We're going to be practicing with it. So let's go ahead and I will show you how I do the first one, and then you can follow along after you get a sense of how to do it. Oops, sorry. That's me trying to record just myself there, but I accidentally took a picture instead. Hold on just a second. This is for future videos. Ignore the beeping sound. Okay. I'm not recording any participants, so don't worry about that. It's just me and my voice. Okay. So for this exercise, maybe I had done a sunset here and a sunrise. You can see the difference in the colors. But perhaps for the first exercise, don't worry so much about the color unless you'd like to focus on the mixing. I'll drop a few reference pictures for some ideas here. You can get a lot of different color variations just with a sunrise or sunset. Even between sunsets, you can get different hues. Oh, that one's not showing as a JPEG. You might have to download those ones, but those are some I just found online. I'm going to try starting with doing something similar to this one that's a sunset. And that means purple on top. I have a very light blue tint here in the middle. You can tell it's not white because against the white of the paper, it's darker. And then here I used a very orangey red. And then I followed up with a dark purple. So this first swatch, I'll start on this side. It's going to be very watery, so I'm dipping my brush, my large one, quite a bit in here, and I'm going to collect some of that purple that I want to use. I already have some here, so I'll just grab this. And I'm going to have it be pretty faint, as in fairly light. Very watery. We need lots of water for this blending to go smoothly and to cover enough ground. So that should be a good start for me, about that much. Then I'm going to go ahead and loosely fill in this area. I'm dipping my brush in the water already just to dilute this even more. This layer can be really light because I'm going to drop the colors in later. And I'm going to fill in what I want for the whole sky. So this will be, and this is a loose, like, kind of bubble shape, oval rectangular shape, just to fill up this area. Okay. And while this is still wet, I can tell from the shine on the surface here. You can see how shiny that is up close. Shiny all the way across with a tiny bit of puddling down there, which I can remove later if I don't want it. Now I've got that layer. I'm gonna clean this a little bit and then pick up more purple. This time I want it to be darker. So I'm picking up that there, making sure this is more concentrated than the last bit that I made. And I'll go ahead and drop that in on the top. That's where I've got this darker gradient. And this will take some maneuvering to spread it out the way I want to, especially with the paper that I've got. So I'll go back and forth here a little bit to spread this out. And I want to smooth that out a little bit, so I'm actually going to dry this out and then go back in and spread it like that. So drying out my brush turns it into kind of like a sponge, and so now that I'm going over it with this drier brush, it's easier to smooth this out. And since this is kind of far away for y'all, I'm gonna try to bring this closer so you can see what I'm doing. So that's my first step. That's how I smooth out my blending. If it's too watery at first on top, I will dry out the brush on a paper towel and then go back in and smooth it over. That way I'm not dropping more water onto that already watery or too watery area. I'm actually removing water with my drier brush and that makes it really easy to smooth out sections. So go ahead and try that yourself if you haven't already. And while this is still wet down here, I'm gonna add in that orangey red. And make sure you add that layer when it's time before it dries up here. Here's my fiery orange, maybe a little bit of red. Remember the rule of thumb, the more water you've got, the more your paints will spread. And that applies to either water on the surface of your paper or in your brush, or the combination of the two. So this one isn't spreading a whole lot because that first layer is already drying. What I can do to adjust it is what I just did earlier. So I'll repeat this step. Dry out the brush, then use the tip of my brush to spread this out more evenly. So we're going to practice this a couple of times because this is one of the hardest things to pin down or master when it comes to watercolor. It's the water control. It's the part of watercolor that everyone complains about the most. But once you get a hang of it, it's very satisfying. So while you are adding these colors and layers and steps, moving your way down, if you want everything to continue to blend as you work your way down, you want to make sure that the area that you're adding color to is still wet. Because the wet on wet only works when you've got the wet surface before you apply the wet brush. So before this dries, I'm just gonna add an ultramarine blue. And this blue is like an ocean color. This is gonna be really dark and concentrated. Oh, there it goes. I forgot to leave a gap for the sun, so maybe this is just gonna be a horizon with no sun on it. I've done this on the top half of one sheet of paper, so with this full spread I can make 4 if they're all about the same size. It's so satisfying to watch the colors blend like that. So that's the step-by-step process to smooth gradients. There are a lot of factors to pay attention to, so like the amount of water, your timing, how much pigment you're using, and how you're maneuvering your brush to spread out those pigments. So does anyone have any questions about how I did this before I do the next one? Okay, looks like no questions so far. I'm gonna continue on to the next one for demonstration's sake. Feel free to look up and watch anytime. I'll just keep explaining myself as I go. I think I will try copying the sunrise that I did. I really like the muted palette here. So I think I've got to clean my palette now. It's full of other colors. Let's see. I can start with the ultramarine blue again here. Let's try this. if you ever want to make a color look more gray, you can either add black or white, or you can add the opposite color on the color wheel. Oop, that's looking a little bit darker than I like. I'm gonna remove some of that paper towel. That's too much pigment. Okay, there we go. Let's make that a little bit more greenish. So remember, if you've got puddles on one side especially, that's where your blending is going to be uneven. So for smooth blends, it's crucial to remove those puddles with a dry brush or a corner of a paper towel. But I find with dry brushes you have a bit more control and it's easier to control. Oh, I think I made that too orange. That's kind of nice. This orange that I have on here is, it's very, very diluted, so it makes like a peachy color, which I really like. Let's try that. Okay. I really like the green I had put down here, so I'm gonna use that again. I don't know about y'all, but just seeing these bands of color make me think of landscapes and skies. This one I made it more saturated than the original. Well, but we'll see how it looks when it dries, because watercolor dries duller compared to when it's wet. That's pretty nice. Maybe I'll fit one more tiny, narrow, thin landscape down here. Maybe I'll aim for a blue sky. How's everyone doing? It's very quiet. Let me try to clean that up. I'm gonna assume everyone's just very focused. The chat is totally quiet right now. Okay. I'm gonna try afternoon sky blue here. Which blue should I use? This one. Ooh, that's dark. I don't think I meant to make it that dark. If I add another layer with water and less paint, I can turn that into a gradient like this. Okay, here's There's another clean swipe. We're really just practicing gradients here. Oh, this is starting to separate, so I'm gonna go over it with my brush to manually blend it. This part's tricky because if I have too much paint or water in my brush doing this, then I'm gonna make patches on my gradient. That's pretty smooth. The water is easier to control the less wet it is. That's why it's easy to make this gradient with a dry brush, because it doesn't move as much when there's less water. The water is what the pigments move within, so the pigments will flow wherever the water is, if that makes sense. So because this is relatively dry, there's very little flow, very little spread, and therefore it's easier to control. Okay, I've done one side. Since there are no questions or comments so far, I'm just going to continue and try different colors. Maybe I want a more fiery sunset, more pink. In that case, I'm going to use more blue and more magenta. I think that's my magenta. Okay, let's see, we'll do blue. Let's do a very deep blue. I'll make this one big. I need a lot of water to cover this whole area. Just out of curiosity, I want to ask everyone, how big is the paper that you're working on? And are you working out of a sketchbook or are you using loose sheets? I'm just curious how large everyone is working at. If you don't mind sharing in the chat. Shamila, you're using 6x6 watercolor paper. Gotcha, thanks for sharing. And am I pronouncing your name correctly? I'm so sorry if I'm not. Okay, thanks for letting me know. Six by 6 is a good size. Yeah, sure. Okay. So mine, I believe, because it's a sketchbook, it depends on which side or which page I'm on. Right now, this is the smoother side, but the difference between the two is the rougher side can hold more water, so it tends to be easier for blending because it gives you more working time since it can hold water longer. And then, what else? then you also get that rough texture on your painting, especially when you're doing, I guess, wait, let me think about it. I think any large areas with color, or any areas of color, the texture of the paper will show through with the rough side. So that's another characteristic of that. But that's the main difference. So the smoother side will dry faster. Yeah, you're welcome. It helps to know the difference. Linda, you're using 7x10 watercolor scrap. Oh, I guess if your room is dry, the humidity is really low, then the air's gonna steal your water away. Okay, you've got some nice bands of color there. I think I'll put in purple for the ocean. I'm looking at a photograph of the ocean. Purple and blue. This is very concentrated, so I can make it really dark. If I leave a little white gap there, I can suggest a sun a little bit for a sunset. Whoop. And this is spreading a bit because it's still a bit wet. Some artists like to use the smoother paper. Typically it's called hot press because it's pressed hot, which is what makes it smooth. And that surface is really good for finer details because the rough texture of the paper, there won't be any to show through. So if you're looking to do highly detailed work, the hot press smooth paper is probably the way to go. That's if you don't want rough paper texture to show through. It's also harder on smooth paper to make your gradients look smooth because every little difference in color will show through on the paper, whereas when you've got a rough paper, it kind of masks it a little bit because it sinks into the rough or the little dips in the paper. So it's less noticeable when your paint is less smooth. So I suppose you could call those the downsides or upsides, more like characteristics of each paper. So I hope that demonstration was helpful. We're already we're 2 minutes away from the 30-minute mark. It always goes by really fast. But now that you know how to do this and you know the process, you can practice this as much as you want. And I always encourage people to experiment with water levels, pigment levels, timing, just to see how the paint reacts. And I feel like that's the best way to learn, is just to try different things. So I hope you had fun making these mini landscapes with me. It's kind of amazing how just a few strips of color can look like a beautiful landscape. So before we complete, feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions, or if you have any suggestions on what to paint next. It's always nature inspired or abstract, so that's the theme we stay within. And I'm happy to stay a bit longer to answer questions or just to keep painting together for a little bit. And thank you for being here. If you've got to hop off, feel free to go. If not, I'll be on for a little bit longer to keep painting. Thanks for joining. Thank you for joining, everybody. I'll see you next time. Happy painting. Take care.